Hello, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral and to today's reflection for Friday the 6th of February. I'm getting a strange symbol on my phone I've never seen before which says rotate device. So I apologise if you're seeing me at an odd angle. Let's see. If I am, I'll just minimise the vision and listen to what I'm saying. I've been reflecting this week on life and death. This week saw the 10 millionth vaccine administered. That's a real lifeline to thousands of people. This was also the week in which we heard about the death of Captain Sir Tom Moore. The day after we heard about Captain Tom's death, I was at a family funeral. My mother-in-law, Joy, was just 1 year younger than Captain Tom when she died. She also had served in the Far East during the war, and she too had lived a remarkable life for which we were grateful to have the opportunity to give thanks. Two members of a fast vanishing generation, of whom Captain Tom has become a kind of patron saint. Take, for instance, this letter about him in the Telegraph this week. Sir, what an inspiration to us all. No snowflake he, but an example of the anthracite generation. Tough, burning brightly to the end. What a nice phrase, the anthracite generation. And every generation has a name. There is Generation X, Generation Y, the Millennials. I'm a mid-range baby boomer myself. And Captain Tom's generation, usually, though less poetically, referred to as the greatest generation. Well, they weren't always seen that way. My dad was of that generation too. He volunteered for the army in 1939, and he told me once how he and some other people from his unit went for a drink in a pub. They were in uniform, and they were mocked and belittled by a group of older men who had served in the First World War. They called my dad and his mates soft, lazy, ungrateful. They told them they had everything better. They were better fed. They were far better equipped than they'd been in the First War. They called them lightweights who didn't know they were born. If Doctor Who had stepped out of her TARDIS and into that pub and informed those old soldiers, you are in the presence of members of the greatest generation, you can imagine what their comments would have been. One of the things I really liked about Captain Tom on camera was the way he never played the generation game. He never said that people of his age were superior or braver or more devoted than younger people. He showed a great generosity to the younger people in one or two encounters which I saw on television. And I wonder what he would have said if someone had asked him, what does it feel like to be an ambassador of the greatest generation? I think he might have raised an eyebrow and said, really? The greatest? All of us? Should you even try to generalise about a whole generation of people? I think to an extent you can. Shared conditions do shape common characteristics. I've been struck over the years in talking to people who lived through the war by how very often they have similar instincts on waste of food and other things, instincts shaped by the experience of rationing. But beyond that, I have encountered enormous variety among that generation. And serious historical studies show this. Angus Calder wrote two books, The Myth of the Blitz and The People's War, which paints a very varied picture of the population of the country during the war, real light and shade. It's something I also see in a work of outright fiction, Foyle's War, which you can catch late at night on ITV3 at the moment. It's a series of whodunits based in the coastal town in Sussex of Hastings during World War II. Now, it has an oddity which it shares with crime and police dramas. Detective Chief Inspector Foyle's Hastings is a remarkable town in the repeated waves of fascinating crimes that befall it, in that it comes second only to Inspector Morse's Oxford. But beyond that, it paints a believable picture. An ordinary town populated by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And most of them are decent, honest people living kindly and even bravely, some of them remarkably so. And then there are others for whom the war is just the latest opportunity to be on the make, and others who have lifelong habits of using power and privilege to get what they want, and they carry on doing the same, war or no war. And then some others who have been broken by the experiences they have endured. In all, a pretty varied picture, and a picture not utterly different from a picture you might paint of us now. Now, all this matters to me because if I'm talking about my generation, the baby boomers, we are quite widely described in terms of what the Bible would call being a crooked and perverse generation. People who, in some ways, lived a charmed life, enjoying the fruits of peace, free healthcare, free education, rising living standards, and who have repaid this blessed good fortune by drinking too much, buying too much, flying too much, doing everything too much, and wrecking it for those who come next. There is an uncomfortable degree of truth in that generalisation, but I reach a point when I want to say, well, yes, but not all of us. Lumping multitudes of humanity together is useful, but it's also dangerous. A phrase like, oh, they're all like that, has in it the seeds of snobbery, racism, prejudice in its 100 different forms, because it suggests a refusal to allow people to emerge into their rich and flawed and varied fullness. And when that happens, we commit an offence against humanity and we deny the richness of our Creator's love. But, as I said, shared conditions do shape common characteristics. So what might our common characteristics be as we begin to emerge from this pestilence that our world has been enduring? I think we may have something in common with the greatest generation, or be called to have something in common with them. I think we could be called to try and achieve something similar. And here I'm thinking not so much of the war itself, but what came next. Just this week, Tony Danker, the head of the Confederation of British Industry, made a speech in which he talked about the United Kingdom having sustained triple shocks. The three shocks he described as leaving the European Union, the coronavirus, and climate change. Now, you may be jumping up and down at this point saying, hey, that is not fair. Two of those things we all agree are bad. One of them, a lot of us actively chose. Well, even so, let's work with the idea that we've suffered some shocks, even if one of those, in many people's minds, is fundamentally positive. What should our response be? Danker, in his speech, says our response should not be like the response after the financial crisis of 2008. That simply served to steady the ship, to stabilise things. No, he said our response must be much more like 1945, which sought not to stabilise alone, but to transform things. What was it that led the greatest generation, or a majority of them, to choose such a course? And what is it that now might be asked of us? I'll end with some words from the Hebrew scriptures from the prophet Jeremiah. He's preaching to a nation who are in tough shared conditions as exiles in Babylon. And he, on behalf of God, tells them this: I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Thank you for listening, and may you and I know the rich love of our Creator. Goodbye.